You're watching BCTV. We're all about Branford. You're watching BCTV, Branford Government Television, a service of Branford Community Television. This program is brought to you in part through the support of the town of Branford.
Good evening, folks. We're going to start off with this is the Board of Finance for the town of Branford, Monday, March 14th, 2022. And this is the beginning of the public hearings for the town's annual budget, which starts as of July 1st, 2022. And tonight we will hear various departments, and the public hearing will be continued until tomorrow night, where we will hear additional departments, public safety, etc. We will then recess until next Monday, when we will hear the balance of the budget presentations. From there, the board will have its deliberations and then plan to meet on the 28th of March at this point in order to, what we call, cut the budget and have a recommended budget to the RTM. From there, the RTM will have their committee meetings and such, and they will finalize the total amount of expenditures. That budget will then come back to the Board of Finance sometime in mid-May, and we will consider any types of revenue adjustments and set the mill rate so that the tax bills can be sent out prior to June 1st, we hope, or sometime thereafter. So tonight we have, before we begin the first presentation, I'd like to review the budget requirements. The total budget requirements requests are $127,024,327, an increase of $6,059,000, which represents a 5% increase in expenditures. From there, there's an estimated revenue of $14,590,000, which would leave a balance of $112,433,000 to be raised by taxation. At this point, the net grand list is estimated to be at $3.8 billion, which would equate to a 30.25 mill rate. That would be an increase if all the expenditures were approved and the revenues stayed the same, of a 0.8 of a mill increase, or 2.7%. The first budget that we will hear, which is corresponds with the RTM's Administrative Services Committee, is Human Services. On page 69 and 70 of the budget books is the detail. Welcome.
Gentlemen, ma'am.
Peter and...
Let me introduce Pam Davies, my number one person. She's my my administrator, my clinical director and assistant director.
He knows who I am.
I know who she is. You don't.
welcome.
Thank you.
So you're looking for an approval, a budget of $1,813,938, increase of $122,724, Peter?
Yes, sir. Maybe I should just go over some of the highlights of some of the changes we made.
Sure.
Some of the changes that, kind of significant changes, if you look at the percentages, we'll start off with our part-time help and seasonal help. So what I'm looking for there is a part-time office assistant, which was added into that column. And also what we did is that we had one of our prescribers, a psychiatric APRN. She was at one point on the other professional services, but in speaking with HR, it would seem better that we move her over to our part-time helps. So that's why that number has increased, because of the psychiatric APRN and the office assistant that we're looking for.
Okay.
And that's on page, I think, 70.4.
70.4, Peter?
That's, yes.
So the only new position you're looking for is the admin assistant,
Yes, the office assistant,
the part-time?
part-time, 19 hours a week. Some of the other changes that we made is the credit card processing fee. We had gone up $1,500 on that because what we're trying to do is get a credit card machine we can use out in the field if we have some fundraising events. And that'll cover any additional cost that might come from that. The other, if you look at the purchase services, other purchase services, and that's on page 70.2. What was added in there is we need a medical director. What I had last year was one of the psychiatrists that was in there. He was a child psychiatrist. He was acting as our medical director. But what we need to stay compliant with DPH is that we need to have a medical director that would work with us at least 4 hours a week to sign off on treatment plans and any other things they might have to sign off on. So that was an addition to that, to the other purchase services.
Okay. Liability insurance and,
Liability insurance, that went up last year. We had budgeted $24,000. I think that came in a little bit higher. And I know for this year, it's $32,000. We don't know what that number is, Joe, until probably February. And then when we get the deals from the broker, then they come with the number. So we're anticipating that's what it's going to be for next year.
okay. Thanks, Peter. We'll take questions from the board. Harry?
Yeah, I had a question, just to back up on the 4 hours a week for a physician. Do you require a certified psychiatrist?
Yes, sir.
So it couldn't be a family physician?
Cannot be. It's got to be a board-certified psychiatrist. And this is according to the DPH rules, Department of Public Health.
Thank you.
Charlie?
Hey, Peter.
Hi, Charlie.
Where did the psychiatric APRN get transferred from into your department?
Yeah, last year, they were part of other purchase services. We have most of our contractors. That's the one on 70.2.
Okay.
And consulting with HR, it would best to put that person at the part-time. There's a IRS criteria that they have to follow, and this particular person didn't complete that. So we were concerned about whether or not the IRS might come back at us and saying, you got to pay for the, for taxes and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions from the board? Jeff, you good? You're good? Anybody else? Okay. I think we're all set. You have estimated revenues of $1.8 million to balance your budget, although the operating transfer in is increasing by $87,000.
Yes, sir.
And how are your collections?
Collections for this year are on target, and we're going to exceed what our number was, which was, I think we asked for $550. We're going to exceed that, I believe, as we're projecting. And a lot has to do with what we're billing, even though we had some blimps in the process because of some people were leaving. We've been picking up the pace. The biggest part that we have to do, Joe, is collecting the money. And it's somewhat difficult sometimes when you're dealing with Medicare and Medicaid. But we're on target with addressing those issues that come up. We're beginning to learn what they're looking for, and we try to react to it pretty quickly.
You do in-house billing?
Yes, we do. Actually, we do. We have someone that does that, and then we go to a clearinghouse with some of our billing. So we have one person is our billing person. So she collects when the EUBs come in.
Right.
She collects that when she posts it to the accounts.
Okay. No other questions?
good.
Thank you for the present. Hey, oh, you know what? Excuse me. Questions from RTM members, question from the general public. Peter? Peter, you have to, anybody who wants to address, we don't have a podium, but we do have a mic somewhere, I think.
Yeah, I've got the mic. I'm
Okay.
just a little confused on the APRN. We're moving that 66,000 or whatever out of purchase services, which is where it is in the book to regular wages? I'm,
No, there's two, actually, Peter, there's two. So the one that's in there now, that we have a APR in there, but we're talking about the person that works 6 hours.
okay, so you've,
I have two. I have two prescribers that are APRNs.
okay,
So what you see here is the APRN that works 16 hours, and we have another APRN that works 6 hours. So the one that works 6 hours, we're going to move her from the other purchase services to part-time help.
okay. Oh, but it's all, that's all, I think, one budget line. It's just a little,
Confusing?
yeah, it's all the same budget line. That's why I'm confused.
Okay.
That's why there's no change in it's all called seasonal and part-time help.
Seasonal, part-time, right.
So she's just moving from one.
From one to another,
One
yes.
subcategory.
Yeah, it's not
of
a new
that,
person,
so I
it's the
don't-
person that we had that we're moving to another.
Okay,
site.
thank you.
We're doing line item. Okay, other questions, comments from the public? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Move on to the tax collector, page 17. Welcome, Robert.
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening. Before you get started, I just would like to recognize the fact that you did provide the board with an update dated today, March 14th, and for consideration of the board. I'm sure we'll have additional questions and from you as well as the administration once we fully read it and understand the challenges that you're undertaking at this time.
Great.
Mr.
Look
Chairman.
forward to questions.
We have a point,
Yeah,
Harry?
just a point. Will we,
I think you're on. You're on.
will we be able to bring this back next week? Give us a week to review it, because
Yeah,
it is
if-
extensive.
That's fine, and if we need to ask Robert to come back, we can do that
That's-
and have him provide additional
Yeah,
information.
or the ability to talk to him during the week. And
I'm fine with that.
thank you.
Okay. All right, sir, you have the floor now for your presentation.
Right, well, just here's some highlights here. So slight increase in regular wages, increased by 1.2, dollar amount of $2,827. We have a decrease of 49% by the elimination of the finance department coming down and assisting us almost every day over the past year. We don't see that happening in the next fiscal year. But we do have an increase in postage by 58%. Basically, what I'm doing is kind of re-looking and revamping our collection process. As you'll see in my write-up, at some point, we decided not to send any delinquent notices out. And when we did, we only sent it out for the current year. So what I'm doing now is going all the way back for any back taxes that are owed and creating delinquent notices. We sent out 6,600 delinquent notices in February. And again, what we're seeing is it's very effective. We're getting payments in. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to also send out demand and intent to lien, so that's increasing our postage up. The return will be great, much greater than the cost of the postage. Starting in our second installment, what's happening is I see folks coming into the tax office, they've lost their second half, they don't know that they have a second half. And of course, if we're using lockbox and they don't send the second half, it's rejected. So it comes back to us and it's a manual process as of today. So it takes much longer for that to get posted. So it's kind of defeating the purpose of the lockbox in some in the timing process. So by creating a second notice in January, folks will be up to date as to what they have for personal property and real estate property. So I think that will certainly help our collection rate. Overtime, again, overtime elimination is, Catherine is moving away from us. She's been a great help and continues to to be a great help with anything we might need. Again, looking at the resident stickers, they're due every 2 years. So we're putting that in we're utilizing our budget this year for that. It comes every 2 years. So we're taking that out of the next fiscal year. We added in $300 for purchase services, which we didn't have before. We had a situation in January where we couldn't open the vault. So created a little bit of an issue to get our taxpayers serviced. Cost us $600. We had nowhere to go for that. We had to get a transfer, so we put in $300 in case we have that again. And then we have state conferences. So we're going to see an increase in that. There's 2 at $250. And then again, we're keeping in the overtime for next year. We'll see how that goes. That's $14,733. And you'll see that the tax refunds have increased by 116%, at $286,498, which certainly affects our bottom line. So, and those are the highlights that I have.
So, thanks, Robert. So the request is for $836,756, increase of $274,250. Some reductions in personal services, however, the large increase of $286,000 for tax refunds.
Correct.
So why is such a large increase in the tax refunds?
Well, Jim and I looked at that. Jim came up with his calculations, and we're probably using, what, a 20% increase in value, Jim?
Yeah, there's a couple things too. Is because each year that you know that you're out from the reval, that's another year of taxes. So in other words, if somebody files a refund, that's another year added to what's back taxes in terms of getting adjusted. So so that's why it's almost doubled from what it was in the prior year, because you got that other year of compounding. What Bob's referring to is you typically look at it from a sort of a global perspective, take all the outstanding appeals and then look at them and then make some adjustments in terms of how much we think of the plaintiff's value and the town's value is going to be given up, and then how many of that's going to be done before the bills go out, and then the rest of that we try to figure out to come to this number. So it's really just looking at a bunch of different data, but each year that appeal is outstanding, you know, so you're refunding it back multiple years.
Right, got it.
And so,
Thanks, Jim.
yep.
Questions from the board? Charlie?
Hey, Bob, it's showing over the time reduction of 14,000, and yet in the paper you submitted, it looks like you're going to request additional overtime. Now,
Yes.
are those two in jeopardy, or is the 14?
No, so one was Catherine's, again, was coming down to help us, and so she was in our overtime budget. So she's now out of that, but I still will need overtime, and that's 3 individuals in our office,
Okay, so we can still count on the 14,000.
14,007, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and just to give you an idea, our collection rate is about 96.8 today, as of about 2:30, and just in billing units, we billed about 57,000 taxpayer bills that
Would
went
you
out.
say 98.6?
96.8.
Oh, you got to go to 98.1.
I like that, Charlie.
I know where you're going, Charlie.
I'm done for the year.
He has it on his chalkboard, I'm sure.
At the top of the page.
And Charlie, the overtime had been going down in the current year's budget. There was somewhat of a reduction as Catherine was phasing out, and then she's phased out even more in this budget. So, but some of the other staff is obviously still working overtime.
Victor, you had a question?
Yep. Okay. Bob, the delinquent interest rate, is that still 18%?
Yes,
That's state mandated?
yes. The statute 1.5% per month.
Wow, okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a pretty good incentive, but you can see by the numbers.
Pretty stiff.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, other questions from the board? Questions from RTM members or general public? No takers? All right, thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Be in touch. Thank you. Next is elections on page 22. Good evening, gentlemen.
Dan Halley couldn't make it tonight, so his deputy, Jeff Rowan, is going to fill in.
Welcome. So the request here is for $253,900, increase of $72,816. Darren, you're going to kick it off?
Sure. Most of the budget is, for the most part, in line from last year. We did add 2 clerical support members. Before, we just had, they were deputies, and they weren't really clerk. They weren't really acting as deputies any longer. So we were able to add 2 deputies and have 2 clerical support people in the office. And they work 2 days a week, 10 hours a week. We went up a little bit in election workers, just with, we feel that the election workers need a little bit of a pay raise because we're having a hard time finding people willing to work on election day. A lot of our election workers are seniors, and because of the pandemic, we lost a lot of them for just, they were fearful of working because of the pandemic. I'll go back to the registrar's pay. Deputy registrars, that's just a basic 2% increase. Seasonal part-time help, that is the, at election time, we usually have someone come in and do some filing for us. Education incentive is the deputies and the 2 registrars being certified with the Secretary of State's office. The professional development, that's through Yukon City Business. That's how you become certified. You know, moving in storage is self-explanatory. Moving all the from our office, all the poles and everything to the
I think
locations.
we're pretty good on that,
Yep.
most of that, Darren. You want to touch on the other supplies and the meal supplies and some of the larger...
The other supplies is that the ballots are very expensive, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Especially in a year where, like, the RTM is on the ballot. It's a big ballot, and that's where they really, they whack you pretty good on that right there. Obviously, the big thing is the registrar's pay. Dan put this together for me, and I went over it with him. I'm only in my I'm not even 3 years yet as a registrar. Dan's been doing this since 2008, and just some of the things he wanted me to highlight tonight to justify the pay increase was overall voters in Branford since 2010 has gone up 19%. He also wanted me, the last pay adjustment for the registrars was in the 2008-2009 budget. In 2010, redistricting went up from 5 to 7 polling places due to the voter increase in town, which also increased the voting staff from around 100 to well over 120 now poll workers. This also increased the strain on our office in recruiting and training poll workers. Just a bunch of other things that were added to the office since he took over. Most of this is all from the Secretary of State's office. The new system they implemented is called the ERIC system. It's Electronic Registration Center, and 34 states are involved in it, and Connecticut is one of those. In 2016, the state implemented DMV registration, online registration. 2016 was also another Secretary of State's program for change of address, which they termed tumbleweed. In 2016, they expanded and improved the IVS system, which is integrated voting, and that's for the hearing impaired or blind individuals. That was implemented in 2016. 2017, they introduced felony reports for our office, modified and made us expand our emergency plan, especially for the pandemic. 2020, they introduced us, now we're doing webinars, monthly webinars with Secretary of State's office. Since the presidential election in 2020, the increase of freedom of information requests has gone through the roof. And that even happened in our past municipal election as well. Mandatory training from the Secretary of State's office is now 12 times annually. I mean, I can go on and on. Just the liabilities of our office has just increased and increased. And especially in the 3 years I've been involved in, especially since the pandemic, the last couple of years, the changes from the Secretary of State's office has, we had to change the presidential primary 3 times in 1 year. And they really expect you to do it on time and to do it right at a moment's notice. And that all falls on our office. That's our liability at Register of Voters Office. We have to answer to the State Elections Enforcement Commission. A couple other things I just wanted to mention is that they're talking about no excuse absentee ballot coming, and that'll put a big strain on our office as well as the town clerk's office. And they're also talking about early voting. Right now, there's 44 states in the country that have early voting, and we're pretty confident that Connecticut is going to be one as well. And the state legislature will determine if our office has to be open 5 days a week. Some states, they're required now to be open 7 days a week. And they can force you to be open 55 days prior to the election, which they do in Pennsylvania. So that was just some of the highlights Dan and I wanted to bring up to mention why we're looking for such an increase in our salaries.
Thanks, Darren. I'll take questions from the board.
Yeah, I
Charlie?
just want to get clear. Did you mention you were adding 2 deputies?
Well, we were, our clerks that worked for us, they were our deputies, and they are now just clerks, and we have we appointed 2 deputies, Jeff being one of them.
Like
So
are
with the
deputies
looking-
like poll watchers?
Excuse me?
Are deputies like a poll watcher?
No, they report to Dan and I directly, and the reason for the deputies is for Dan and I to train them so they can take over for us. God forbid something happened to Dan and I, and we cannot perform our duties during an election.
I see.
The deputies is basically an arm of the registrar.
I didn't see them mentioned though in the.
They're right there. You have
Oh,
deputies
over here.
there, and then
Okay,
you've
now I got
got, so really what you're increasing is the part-time
Yeah.
side of it. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
got them.
Other questions from the board? Questions from the general public or RTM members? Okay, I think you're all set.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next
so
is
bad, was it,
information technology, page 29. Welcome, Debbie and Mike.
Yes, so this is Mike Vanacore. He's been with the town nearly 3 years. He's our senior network engineer.
Welcome. How are you?
All right, let's get into it. So, basically this year, most of our increases is in purchase services, and it's being driven by the fact that we need to add cybersecurity services, multi-factor authentication, and with everything going on with the shortage of the supply chain and the constant changing and increase in hardware and software vendor prices, this is causing a fluctuation in our pricing. So it's becoming harder and harder in IT to put a budget together a year in advance, so I do my best to average what I think the price is going to be close to. You know, when we go to order this stuff 6 months from now, a year from now. Other things that are causing our increase has to do with end of life. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
No.
Oh,
I'm good.
You'll notice on page 29.2, our capital procurement plan. So what's coming up is our Salaries storage, which is all our databases, all our data is stored on that. It is now coming up on 10 years, and Hewlett-Packard decide to no longer support it. So it's at end of life. That has to be replaced. That contract ends in October this year. Also, we'll need to replace about 80% of our desktop computers because Windows 10 will be end of life October 2025. Wow. And we have some very old PCs as old as 15, 16 years old, and they cannot support Windows 11. So we're going to do it in stages, order 20, 30, 20. I'm hoping we're going to be able to get the computers this year. We don't know, but I'm budgeting for it, so I'm hopeful. But what is on this capital procurement plan, I'm working with the First Selectman's office with Jamie and Finance and Jim and Catherine, and hoping that these items will be able to be covered through the American Rescue Plan Act.
Okay, so you threw quite a bit at us here, and I'm looking at which is good. You know,
well, like for instance, if you go to page 29.3, my purchase services,
yeah, I see that.
and
Yeah.
if you look at lines 12, 13, and 14, those
Yeah.
are some of the new items.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, O365, Office 365 licensing. We're slowly bringing all employees in. Right now we're starting to do kind of a hybrid mode with Office. It's on-premise, and we're slowly moving some people to an Office cloud. Why do we want to do this? Well, because we need to start using multi-factor authentication, especially for email. The only way for us to achieve that cohesively is in the cloud. We are a Microsoft shop, so it makes sense to move in that direction. Plus, there'll be other applications we could use with Office 365 that'll be in the cloud and we'll be able to secure. The managed cybersecurity services, I went out and I spoke with about 7 or 8 different companies. One company came back with a quote for roughly around $50,000, which was about 2 months ago. And that was to manage our whole environment, to watch it 7/24 and make sure we're not getting attacked, we don't have an intruder. On a daily basis, Mike is looking at the network, and we are being hit constantly. We are a municipality, we manage public safety services, we're a direct target. So now we need to do this. On top of it, if we don't start implementing some of these things, we won't be able to have cyber insurance. So we need this.
Okay, questions from the board on this?
Yeah.
Harry?
Do we currently have any basic coverage for cyber protection? We do.
We do.
We do. Right now we do, yeah.
So you're looking at a more state-of-the-art program? Because you've got the managed
Well, the
cybersecurity.
requirements since in the past year, everything going on, more and more municipalities have been hacked. I
Yeah.
don't know if you've read in the news over the last year or two, we had Hamden, West Haven, East Haven too, I think.
I think East Haven a little bit.
And so now the requirements become more and more, difficult. Sophisticated, yeah. What you need to have to be insured, yes.
And you really need somebody dedicated that knows not only what's existing, but also keeping their finger on the pulse of what's coming down the pipe too.
Right.
That's
Because
its own job in itself.
We
basically.
put into place as much as we can to protect the entire environment, but the hackers seem to always be a step ahead of us. So that's the issue.
And just one, are they hacking the whole system or just departments?
No, it's the whole system. I mean, they'll tunnel in and they'll get whatever they can. A lot of times, the attack will be directly at police services. Other times, it'll be geared towards finance. They're just trying to fish to find whatever they can.
It's not necessarily people we got to worry about, just people leaving their computers on that are just trying random connections and just hoping that they get lucky and hit something now. So.
Okay.
Other questions from the board on this? Okay, I think questions from the RTM or general public? Jamie?
Just for the board may notice, reviewing the documents, that we are requesting a salary adjustment for the IT director's position. You know, I don't know if you want to address it at this time, or it's up to the board's decision. You want to discuss.
Yeah.
Or do you want
so,
to finish your review of the department first, Joe?
Yeah, we could see you can see the details on page 78, and then we could address it going forward. Is that fair?
Sure.
Is there specific questions from the
Yeah.
board? Thank you for that, Jamie, and I think we're all set then.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next is elderly services on page 44. Welcome, Dagmar.
Hello.
How you been?
Pretty good.
Okay, good. Okay, we'll get to page 44. Your total budget request, $451,843, an increase of $5,411, 1.2% increase. You want to hit the highlights, if there are any?
I sure will. There's no increase other than contractual and what was recommended by Board of Finance in any of the wages and salaries or the positions. Those are remaining flat. So we don't have an increase there except for what was contractual on that. On the operating side, there's just a few slight changes. In our employment testing went up $250. There was an increase in our CDL physicals and the drug testing that we belong to the CCM consortium for our drug testing. They went up a little bit there. I was able to recoup some of that under our purchase services contracts, in that we just recently got our 2 new buses that we ordered over a year ago. We finally got them, and so we were able to reduce some of the repair cost on that. So we popped that down a little bit. But still, you have to do all the oil changes, the DMV inspections, all the things that you need to do there. And then there was just, I reduced in the travel a little bit because some of the things that we normally would travel to are still remote, and I see that happening for a while. So overall, our operating expenses were reduced some. But other than that, there really were no major changes in our budget this year.
That's good. And how's programmatically, the building's open and fully
Oh,
functional?
yeah, we're all back in-house. A few programs are hybrid because people have requested that. We're probably at about 75% pre-COVID numbers right now, and we're still trying, some people are still leery,
Yep.
but we are getting people back. All our programs are back. Yeah, we're up and running. It's a beautiful thing to hear people in the building.
Absolutely.
It's really nice. We're really pleased about that. And I'm really proud of my team and what they did during COVID with the response, with all the vaccinations, the masks, the test kits, the resources. So we transitioned pretty quickly to everything remote, and now we're off the remote and back in person. So we're back in.
Back in action.
We're back in action, yeah, and we're happy and we welcome everyone back. We're really thankful for that. That's on my budget line items. I don't know if you want to do capital as well.
Sure.
On our sinking fund. Let's get to that.
That is on
44.4.
44.4, yes.
And on that, like I said, we had purchased our 2 vehicles. We got them exactly 1 year after the date we put in the order. So it took a long time, and I'm on the board of directors for the transit district. right now across the country, there are, they said, 50,000 vehicles waiting in the queue because they can't get chips. So we just got in, so it's really a difficult thing for transit districts all across the country, trying to get vehicles. But we got ours, so we'll put in the one for 2 years from now pretty soon, just to see if we can get it. But we kept our capital request at $35,000 for the sinking fund. I reviewed that with Jim, so that we can keep the money in there and replace the vehicles that need be. We do have 6 vehicles. We have 3 buses and 3 cars.
All right, thank you. Questions from either Dagmar on either the capital or the operating? Charlie?
Hey, Dagmar, going back to employment testing, you do physicals, drug testing, do you do criminal background?
No, HR, when we hire people, HR does a background check on people.
Oh, so that's done prior to you?
And on the CDL drivers, that goes through DOT. We have to put it through
Okay,
that.
thanks.
Okay, other questions? Questions from the RTM or members, or we'll take one from Mark. Yes. I need to get a mic, if you would, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to just make a comment and commend Dagmar for what she did during the COVID testing, which was held. My wife and I went down to the hospice location,
hospice,
and it was really great. I just want to take that opportunity to publicly acknowledge it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm proud of my team and my colleagues that we all work together, Joe at hospice too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions or comments? Sure. Dennis?
Just a question, Dagmar. I know you received a new bus already. Is that how many passengers? That's 14?
We have a 17 and a 14.
All right, and in the sinking fund, you're still looking for the 20
14
passengers?
and 21, I'm sorry.
What?
It's a 14 and 21.
14, yeah. And in the sinking fund, I see you're still looking for that 20 passenger.
Correct. That'll be in the queue, the next one we get to replace. The one we have now, the older one's a 2008.
Okay.
So it's at its end of its useful life.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments? I think you're all set, Dagmar. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next is East Shore Health District. Are they present? Yes. Page 45. Welcome, Michael.
Good evening.
So you're asking for $341,462, which looks like a $20,612 increase.
Correct, yes.
Okay. I'd like to hit the highlights of that, if you would.
Sure. So the per capita by the East Shore District Board of Directors was set at $12.10. Roughly about $4,000 of that increase is an increase in population. Branford increased their population by 320 individuals. So mosquito control budget is a line item that it's one that we manage, but it's not within our budget. Those funds are actually in the Branford town budget. We just manage the contract with All Habitat. The pump out water quality program, so this is for the two vessels that we run for and manage. It's funded at 75%, and then each town, there are 5 towns in the program, contribute $3,000. So for a total of $15,000 for the total of the 5 towns. And so the increase is $20,000, $612. And got a couple of things going on. One, we are transitioning to an EPIC program. It's the same system that, say, Yale New Haven Hospital uses for tracking over the last couple years. There are some changes in the world of public health and how we do vaccinations and some of our clinical services. So that's one of the reasons for the increase. The other one is just increase in the MRF plan. That's our retirement plan, same plan that the town of Branford has. It's gone up significantly. Healthcare and just some of our other costs. What's not reflected in this budget, and we're keeping it like it is, we were just informed by the State Department of Public Health that they're cutting our budget by $60,000 for our MRC funding. So we're working with the region to try to recover that money.
And what's the reason why the state would be cutting you $60,000?
Our health department is the regional lead for Region 2 for the Medical Reserve Corps. So the state gives us funding to manage that. So a lot of the clinics, the COVID clinics, the flu clinics that we run, we use volunteers along with our staff. That funding has been cut by the State Department of Public Health. So now that funding, we're going to absorb some of that, those cuts, but we're also working with the region to try to secure some level of funding to offset that budget cut from the state.
Thanks, Mike. Questions from the board? Charlie?
So I'm a little confused on the 60,000. Is that reflected in here yet?
So I just found out that last week. It's not reflected in this budget. So in the budget that I sent, you'll see a line item for $60,000 in our budget. I just brought that up just to let you know that we received a budget cut, but it's not, we have no intentions to change our budget.
Okay, but you're trying to raise or replace that money some other way?
Correct, yes, yeah, and that's actually quite common in our budget. So some of the grants that we get, they come in different times of the year. Some follow fiscal years, some don't. And so there are some grants that within this budget that we don't know if we're going to get. We're pretty confident we'll get them, but they do fluctuate. And just that particular one, we were just informed last week after we set our budget that it was a budget cut.
Thank you.
Question, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, Harry.
During the COVID, you ran immunization clinics, and you were reimbursed from the federal government for that, I believe. Is that the way the program runs?
So we did receive some grant money from the state, and we're in the process of doing some billing for some of the COVID vaccines that we've given. So correct, we did receive some funding for that.
So that doesn't show in the numbers we're looking at here at all. What,
so within the,
for example, I know, some of the hospitals, they got $40 on a injection. Some got as high as $50. Can you tell us what you received per injection?
So within this budget, there's a line item of about $130,000 that we so far have recovered for flu vaccines and COVID vaccines.
Okay. Well, does that show that you made a profit?
Oh, no, there is no profit. So we hired a lot of per diem nurses. We expanded our nursing staff.
Okay.
And so while the federal, well, it was federal money, but passed through the state that we did receive, it did not cover our cost.
Well, weren't you eligible to apply for what the total costs were to receive the reimbursement?
So
how did they allocate the reimbursement to you?
We're still going through the billing process.
Okay.
So their billing process is still almost a year behind. So we're still putting in, some of the claims are getting, we're receiving, others we're not. So it's very complicated and how the whole COVID billing has been going.
Right.
Yeah, it's fairly, I can attest that it's fairly complicated and not easy to either get the insurance companies to pay for some of the administration nor other funding sources. So that's probably, it's an ongoing issue to try to collect on the administration of it. But, you're hiring nurses on a per diem basis?
So we have a full-time public health nurse, a part-time public health nurse, and then we backfill with per diem nurses, and then we also have some volunteers.
Harry, anything else? You're good?
Oh, thank you.
Pam, you're all set? Other questions? Questions from RTM members? Sir?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Williams. Eddie Creed, RTM, representative from the 6th. I had a little trouble hearing Michael. He mentioned the increase. They're converting their tracking, some kind of tracking mechanism and healthcare costs, and then he said other expenses. Can you kind of elaborate on what those other expenses are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes. We're moving, and we're in the process of transitioning to a system called Epic. So it helps us with scheduling and billing for the different types of vaccines. We were using a system called the VAN system. That system's no longer being used, and through COVID, what we experienced, like many other healthcare providers, is that we need to get a better medical tracking system. So we're in the process of doing that. When I talked about the other cost, there's the retirement plan, the MRF plan, which is going up to, I want to say 17.55%. So for every employee in the plan, we as an agency have to pay that percentage. Our health care is going up, our rent's going up, and we just have other costs that are constantly going up.
Is that sufficient?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Frank, you need to get a mic.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
I'm not sure if that's working. Make sure that's on.
Test 1, 2.
No,
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm Frank Toohill, 1st District, RTM. I'd like to call your attention to page 45.3 under expenditures. I would like to know the increases for all those line items. What's the amount and what's the percentage for each one, please? Thank you.
Michael, would you have that information tonight?
I'm not sure what line item you're talking about.
All right, well, it's under expenditures, page 45.3. I would like to know the amount and also the percentage increases for salaries, payroll taxes, fringe benefits, consultants, and general expenditures. Thank you.
So I don't have that breakdown in front of me right now.
Okay, you can provide
but
it to the board.
I could provide that, yes.
Okay. Frank, they will provide it to the board in the next day or so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Are there other questions or comments with regard to this budget? Okay, Michael, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Next up is Assessor, page 15. And we have a presentation from Finance Director Jim Finch and Selectman Cosgrove.
Yeah, we're basically pinch hitting for Barbara, who's unable to make it tonight. Barbara's budget, as you know, Bob was here earlier talking about collecting the taxes. Barbara's budget is the one that determines the value, and you probably did notice there was good growth in the grand list this year. Essentially, the big changes for her budget are in the area of the wages, and those reflect contract settlements. And in some of those cases, the budget has not been adjusted yet, and when it does, those percentages will go down, not the dollars, but the percentages that compare the year over year. The rest of the non-personal accounts have stayed the same, and we're also on the capital side, basically keeping the revaluation reserve funding flat. The reason we do that is so that when we do have the updates and the physical revaluations, that the money's there for that. You can see on page 15.8, she talks about the statistical update in 2024, than the actual physical reval in 2029.
Okay, request is for $465,544, increase of $5,225, 1.1% increase. You have questions from the board? Questions from RTM members or members of the public? Okay, thanks, Jim. Move on to Board of Assessment Appeals, page 16. Again, Jim's going to cover this.
And the Board of Assessment Appeals is lower, and that's essentially because in years when they have a lot of the hearings for the appeals, they actually increase the size following revaluation years. So this is not a revaluation year, so you can see that the budget is down from where it was in 21, 22.
Thanks, Jim. The budget request is for $14,360, a decrease of $5,230. Are there questions from the board? Questions from RTM members or general public? Not, thank you, Jim. Move on next to the probate court, page 21. Request of $15,900, increase of $1,441.
And again, the judge was unable to make it. I believe he's out of the country, and so basically asked if we could just go over it on his behalf. You can see that he did increase some of his non-personal accounts. You know, the general liability by $350, and then the others, his communications and the others.
Got it. Okay, questions on this budget? $15,900. Questions from the RTM members, members of the general public? Okay, thank you, Jim. Next, move on to executive, page 12. Request is for $310,104, increase of $39,158. Jamie?
Okay, thank you, Joe. Looking at the personnel items, you'll see in seasonal and part-time, that's $31,028. I just want to make the board aware that is not a new position. That is the current part-time economic development manager. It was previously in last year's budget, or this current year's budget, under the Economic Development Commission page. So we're just moving that and bringing that position back under executive, where the position when it was a full-time special projects manager, and that position had those responsibilities, was under the executive budget. The other increases is the just for the 2% for the assistant, as well as the part-time and elected officials, the other two selectmen. Moving down, you'll see a pretty good increase of $4,700 under furniture and fixtures. All departments within Town Hall purchase their furniture and fixtures that they may need, the desk chairs, any replacement cabinets, go through this account. So rather than having each department carry a small furniture and fixtures account, all departments within Town Hall purchase through this account.
Okay, that's not your office.
Yep, and then, yeah, not to worry about. And then the only other add to non-personnel is New Haven County Soil and Water. That is a nonprofit 501c3. It was previously, it was in the executive budget a number of years ago. We had not contributed to this organization. However, in the past year, we have been utilizing their resources. They have assisted with the Farm River project, some other water quality improvement projects in town, and have assisted various departments, sustainability and compliance, wetlands, in some other areas. So we do utilize their services. So we thought it was fair to contribute this year to their organization.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. Questions on this budget? Questions from the board?
I got a quick.
Charlie?
Hey, Jamie, just to go quickly, in New Haven County Soil and Water, is that a committee that meets, or are they just a data collecting source that you can access?
No, they're an organization that again provides various levels of services and help with various studies. So it's
I mean, do you have to
there's an
attend
executive
meetings?
director. There are staff members.
Okay.
A couple staff members within the organization.
Okay, thanks.
And they do coordinate. Also, they have coordinated in the past with the town a number of volunteers who will come and assist with different projects that the town may be undertaking.
Thanks.
Okay. Questions from RTM members, members of the public? Yes, ma'am. Could you grab a mic, please?
Sure.
And if you could identify yourself.
Sure. I'm Tracy Emerson, RTM Minority Leader. I have a question about the consulting fee, the consulting line here. $2,250 is what was the actual this year. It's going up to $20,000. What is that being utilized for? Is it being utilized?
So the year with the actual was in the 21 fiscal year was the 2250 you're referring to. However, that was we didn't utilize much consulting. That was pretty much everything was shut down in the midst of the pandemic. However, I can inform you and update you that perhaps that account will be fully expended this year. It's being utilized. We did a pilot program which evaluated the feasibility of composting in town, which we utilized that consulting line to provide information to the town. And we are also in the process of engaging a consulting firm to perform some salary analysis of various departments and positions.
Okay.
So it will be fully expended this year, perhaps, and we'll be utilizing it again next year. So I ask that it remain flat funded year over year.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. Additional questions on that, or on this selectmen's budget? Okay, thanks, Jamie. We'll move on to legal services on page 19.
So our request is the same as it is in the current year of $270,000 in counsel and legal advice, $30,000 for expenses and claims, and $150,000 in tax appeals. We feel that is a appropriate number to budget. As this board is well aware, a lot of our legal expenses oftentimes is event driven, and the finance director does account for some of those possible needs through contingency. But in terms of the general fund budget, in this line items, we feel to hold those numbers flat is appropriate.
Okay, questions from the board on legal services, total of $450,000 request, 0 increase. No questions from the board. Questions from RTM members, general public? Ma'am? Tracy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you update us on what is happening with Crescent Bluff, given the RTM approved a year or two ago?
Yeah,
The
so-
settlement, and it still isn't settled?
Correct. So over the past year or two, since the town accepted the proposed settlement, there were a number of filings and motions that were submitted. Happy to report, I think it was within the past 2 weeks, the courts ruled throughout the last claim that was filed, and so hopefully we'll be bringing this to a close in the coming weeks. But it was, other parties that were involved filing different motions and claims.
Okay. Thanks for the update on that. Other questions on this legal budget? Okay, thank you. Next, we'll move on to legislative, which is page 11. Request of $18,503, increase of $209. Lisa?
Hi, for those that don't know me, I'm Lisa Arpin, Town Clerk, and we are on page 11. The requested budget is $18,503 for the legislative, and that represents a 1.1 increase, which is a proposed salary increase to the part-time elected official salaries, which represents the 3 RTM stipends. One is the moderator and then 2 clerks. There is no change in the non-personnel, so I propose that we approve 18,503.
Okay, questions from the board on this budget? Questions from RTM members and the general public?
We're thrilled our pay is getting a huge percentage increase. Same as yours.
Yes, thank you. All right, thank you, Lisa. We'll move on to the town clerk, page 18.
Thank you. I want to point out that page 18.1 does have a typo. The town clerk salary is incorrect. It should read $81,747 instead of $82,568. So the total wages and salaries is $244,528, and so your page 18 reflects the correct numbers. I will say that over current year, we're just proposing increase of $1,691. That represents a proposed 2% increase for yours truly. And for non-personnel, it's remaining flat for the last several years. In fact, it's even lower than the fiscal years 2015 to 2019. So the increase of $300 I'm proposing to the office supplies line, and that represents the increase in general office supplies, especially paper, which is used in the public copier.
Thanks, Lisa. Total budget request, $275,257. Questions from the board?
No.
Questions from RTM members or members of the public? Okay, thank you, Lisa.
Joe, I just want to point out on the revenue side, for town conveyance tax, at current time, we are at $538,500, which represents an increase of over budget right now, year-to-date, of $138,600. And comparing to the same time frame when I presented last year, we're up $63,000 over this time last year. So although we are starting to see land record recordings level out a little bit, we're still seeing some high ticket properties selling. So I just wanted to point that out. And then also on the online revenue portal, right now we are at 20,400. The budget is 26,000, so I propose that we'll have an increase on that line as well.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you for the update. Okay, with that, we'll move on to the next budget, which is building inspection and enforcement. Page 37. And this is now RTM Rules and Ordinances Committee's territory. Welcome, Tony.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My budget presentation begins on page 37. I'll hit the highlights for you. Just a simple salaries increase of 2.3, which also includes a supervisor's contract that was just recently ratified, which also includes a retro pay that expired past June, 2.3% increase. We're also asking for an additional 75% increase in consulting services. This is due to the high demand of the number of permits and work that the department is currently faced with. So currently right now, the $20,000 covers approximately 476 hours. We're asking for an additional 15,000, which would cover an additional, bring that up to 832 hours, or basically 2 days a week for our consulting services to come in and help us deal with that. So our overall increase is 218,601, which is a 9.5% increase.
Thanks, Tony. You're estimating a reduction in revenues?
A reduction?
I'm looking at 21 from 855 down to 575.
That was the actual.
That,
There's actually the increase is going up 125,000.
right.
Okay, I'm
That's
looking
correct.
at 37.2, so maybe I'm reading it wrong?
So I have an actual was 814,000.
What's that?
Yeah, the 855, that number should be, that's not the, that's what you're estimating for this year, the actual.
Correct.
budget was,
Correct.
four change for an increase by 125,000. So there are two different things. One is, this is what he's estimating revenue, the other is the actual budget.
Okay, so
Correct.
we're estimating next year how much?
575,000.
Okay, and you estimated how much this year?
855,000.
So it is a reduction in revenue estimate? No? I mean, I'm just looking at it and trying to read it.
So budget to the budget. So in the current budget, the revenue that was adopted was 450. Budgeting 575 for next year. That's an increase of 125 budget. Estimating is going to bring in 800
The current
Oh, I
year,
got
correct.
you. It wasn't-
855,000 is what we're estimating for the current year.
Okay.
So basically what I've done is I've run reports to date, and then I've taken last year's calculations and added in for the final
So
quarter.
you're estimating a modest increase over what your estimate was last year?
That's correct.
Okay, got
That's
it.
correct.
I understand.
That's correct.
With that, do we have questions from the board? So the building activity is,
Yeah, quite a bit, Mr. Chairman. We have 10 new commercial permits that we issued this year. If I could share some information with you.
Sure.
We have 10 fit-ups, 5 new ones this year. Single-family dwellings to date is 18. Two-family dwellings, we've seen an increase this year. We currently are sitting at 5. Solar projects are continuing to be a hot topic with 131 permits issued for solar in the town. And also generators still seem to be a hot topic in the town. We've issued 108 permits to date this year, going into the fourth quarter.
okay, thank you. No questions from the board? Questions from the RTM members? General public? Okay, Tony, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Okay, next is in the wetlands, page 26.
Joe, I'll present. Jamie Frederick, the director, is unable to attend tonight.
Sure, thank you.
Regular wages and salaries is going up 3%. That does include, obviously, the contractual obligations. Also, it was a retro year for those positions. So it's coming in at 3%. That's the only change. Going down to the non-personnel items, eliminating travel expense of $250 because the department does have a town vehicle that they use for inspections, and moving those dollars, that $250 up to professional development. So holding the non-personnel item overall flat. That's it.
Okay, so the request is for $142,431. Are there questions on this budget?
Talking about revenues? Yeah.
You want to talk about revenues? Sure.
So the estimated revenues for this current year was $50,000. Estimated revenues projected for the 22-23 budget is dropped down to $18,000. Revenue is from application fees, which is based on an area of disturbance. We had, expected to receive, which we had, some sizable projects this current fiscal year. So that's what led to the increase in estimated revenues. There hasn't been any projects that are identified in the next fiscal year. So taking a conservative estimate and reducing those revenues.
Okay, questions, additional questions on this budget from the board? Questions from RTM members or the general public? Okay, thank you. Next is planning and zoning, page 23. Total request of $370,766. Increase of $19,190. Welcome, Harry.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay. So I'll just hit the highlights.
Sure.
Most of the budget is flat. If you look down at the bottom, sort of grouping of items and accounts. Everything from professional development down through memberships, conferences, and meetings, we've kept flat. Going back up to the top, of course, like other personnel-intensive departments, there have been increases in wages and salaries. Those are all contractual, as you've probably been hearing. There are a couple of changes and a couple of increases. The first is the board clerk. In conjunction with the HR department, that sort of per meeting stipend has been transformed to a overtime account. So the person doing the minutes is going to be paid on an hour-by-hour basis. So the shorter the meetings, lower the cost, the longer the meetings, the additional cost. And sort of averaging out our meetings, you may be aware that some of them have been going on fairly long into the nights. We've had 4.5-hour meetings. I think the last 3 meetings for planning and zoning. I probably expect the next one this Thursday to go over 11 o'clock as well. But I figured an average. So I figured about 3 hours a meeting. When I roughed it all out, the time to sit at the meetings and take minutes and then produce the minutes afterwards, this is the estimate I came up with. So I don't know if Margaret wants to elaborate on that or not, but there's reasons for that, but that's the mechanics of the money of it. The other item, as we go down here to seasonal part-time help, last fiscal year requested help for the department. We ended up proposing a consulting line item This year, we moved it over to seasonal part-time help. This is a temporary position. The person's been helping last fiscal year onboarding the new zoning enforcement officer. As you're probably aware, I think last year I went over the saga of the last few years where we've had 3 different staff configurations over the last 2.5 years. So our new person came in June of last calendar year. And the part-time person has been a zoning enforcement officer for 35 years in another town. So he was very helpful in onboarding that person. One of the other tasks we set that person was starting us down the road of transitioning from paper-based operation to a digital, online, computerized permitting process. It's really going to take us quite a while to do that. I mean, he started this year after kind of on board the ZO and has been sort of going through our files and getting us prepped for that. So we're requesting that continue, basically about the same amount of money, and that is about 14 hours of help a week, with 2 weeks off a year. So we're keeping that in the request. Also, down the consulting line item, proposing $10,000 to help us with some out-of-house consultant help to do development reviews. We've had significant increase in applications. I think we went over that last year as well. Just anecdotally, I think I went through 2 sort of snapshots. One was our second meeting in October, and the other was the first meeting in March. And just going backwards in the last year, 2021, we had 17 applications on the agenda at that meeting, 21 in 2020. Going backwards, 14, 9, 11, 14, 11. So you can see it's really trended upwards in the last couple of years, and really I don't see that abating anytime in the immediate future. There are a lot of development activity going on. There's a lot of building, as you've probably seen, going on, so it's of course a process. When you make the application, you probably might not see the building start in for a year. So there's a lot going on. The March meeting, same kind of thing, 20 in 2021. 19 applications in 2020, 11, 7, 12, 6, 5 in 2015. So really need the help, frankly. I'm looking at other options to potentially charge developers. There was a new state law passed, became effective last October. What the ramifications are in terms of how we can do that and what circumstances are kind of unclear. So we may need both, frankly, to keep up with what's going on. So I think that's it in a nutshell. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Sure, thanks, Harry. Questions from the board? Charlie?
All right, these people on the same consulting, do they hold some credential that you
Yeah,
use?
we'd probably a similar credential to what I have, which is sort of a national, called American Institute of Certified Planners. You have to take an exam and maintain that. You have to do a certain amount of continuing education hours per year. We did have a consulting firm that gave us some help about 1.5 years ago before our transition to last assistant planner. And they're still available, so there's a couple other people who do it around the state.
This is not just one person then, is that right? It's 12,000?
No, well, I mean, it depends. We had a firm, and there were actually 2 persons in the firm, so they sort of swapped out depending on their workload. But it would just cover probably about, I did the estimate, came out to about 100 hours. You figure the going rate's probably about $100 an hour, which is about double what a person actually get paid in terms of overhead to be that.
Okay,
so.
thanks.
Okay, other questions on this budget? Total requested $370,766. Questions from RTM members? Members of the public? Okay, Harry, thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Zoning Board of Appeals, page 24.
So even though it says Jim, I have talked to him and I'm filling in for him if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Essentially, this is also a flatline budget. The only increases were a 2% increase for the board clerk, I think that was the number, and a small bump up in advertising, printing, and binding to cover cost increases and putting legal ads in the newspaper to cover public hearings for applications.
Total budget request of $9,492. Questions from the board? Questions from the general public, RTM members? Okay, you're all set, Harry. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, we'll move on to the economic development budget, page 25. Total request of $19,150, a decrease of $28,305. Welcome, Perry. And
Kathy Lezon.
How are you?
Good, how you doing?
Kathy is the new Economic Development Chair,
Sure.
as I know all already.
Okay.
We have the budget presented with, first of all, the part-time staff that Jamie mentioned is being moved to the executive budget. So that leaves us with the requested amount of $19,150. It's a 2115 increase, 12.4%.
Okay.
Of non-personnel.
Non-personnel, so it's really all non-personnel.
Correct.
And I see you have a increase in other purchases of services of $1350 and an increase in advertising and et cetera of $1970.
That's correct.
The board has questions on this? Questions? Questions from RTM members? Okay, and anything else you'd like to tell us about your economic activity?
I'll just jump in that, as all of us can see, development in town has been great. There's a lot going on at every single exit, all throughout the town. And a lot, we've seen apartments at exit 55, commercial developments along exit 53, all things where areas have definitely enjoyed some improvement. So, and I think that's just goes back to the town itself. Got to give the town credit for being what it is and where it is. So, thank you.
Thanks, Perry. Thanks, Kathy. I think you're all set.
Thank you.
Take care. Next budget is Water Pollution Control Authority, page 65 and 66. Welcome, Brian.
Good evening, everyone. The budget is asking for $4,797,890 for fiscal 22-23. Going over the budget this year, the increases that I had, the bigger one was the sludge hauling that we bring to Cynic Grove, and the contract ends in June. So we had an increase due to the fuel cost in hauling our sludge that we haul out every day, about 3 to 4 tankers a day. So I had to increase that in the budget for that. That was the biggest increase out of all the stuff I had.
Right. And I see employee benefits are up by 24,000.
Yeah, the benefits are up too.
Yeah, Joe, that's a number that we provide.
Okay. So really, the sludge is your biggest issue, sludge and chemicals?
Yeah, the chemicals actually, I did pretty well with. I have them down pretty good, so I moved some money out of chemicals and I put it into R&M for repair and maintenance. We have 51 pump stations in the facility, so every year I try to get 2 to 3 stations rebuilt. And like right now, give you an idea of activities I have going on right now. The plant, we're about 95% done. We just purchased a brand new generator for the facility at 75 Block Island Road. The old generator was like 40, 45 years old. So that's just about done. And then I have 3 pump stations I did this past year. I rebuilt them with pumps. Central's another station I'm putting new pumps in. So, and that's our biggest station. So we have the bar rack system. We have one right now. We're putting another one in. Septic receiving building. The diffusers for the aeration tank, we're doing them this year too. Because the facility's 21 years old this year. So it's at the point of we're going through the equipment, through the facility, and everything's working well right now.
Right. And is that a pump station down there by 4th Ward that you're rebuilding?
Yeah. Yeah, we had one over there, blocks over there we did work at. The one across Chestnut Pump Station, we put a brand new generator in there. Pine Orchard, we put a new generator in that station about 2 months ago. And we also have been changing our SCADA for the pump stations that give us alarms back to the plant. We're going towards a cell technology, the equipment. So we did actually a total of 8 stations already out of the 51. So now the men, when they get called in, they could see on their phone the height of the well. They could see, and this would save us money too long term. We could tell if one pump is running longer than the other to pull it to save electricity too. We have more indication factors on that technology.
Sure.
So that's what we're working
Come a
on
long
now.
way. Questions on the operating before we get to any capital items from the board? Questions? Questions from RTM members or general public on the operating side of this? Okay, so Brian, you're also asking for some capital items?
Yes, I met with Jim, and I had some projects that we have the UV system, for instance, that they don't make parts anymore, so I have to put a new system in. So I had capital. We rebuilt the gravity belt thickener, and the extra monies I had from these accounts, I want to swing over to the to do the UV and a bunch of stuff. We had the variable frequency drives at the facility. They run all the pumps. We have like 15 of them, and they're 21 years old, so I'm changing the guts out on them. So the septic receiving unit, it's another project we're doing this year too. So when the septic trucks come in, now we'll have a defined amount of septic that they're dropping off for us, and that's like a 25% increase in revenue for us when we get this unit put in. So there'll be extra monies from that, and the generator at the plant, I had extra money for the installation was a lot less than what we had for capital for it. So these monies that came to $1,507,866. I want to transfer them over to the VFD drive repairs in the facility. We have a SCADA system through the facility. It's analog, and I have to get it up to digital because you can't get the input-output modular parts anymore. So that was what I'm doing with the monies. I'm transferring it to that stuff to rebuild the plant.
Thanks, Brian. Jim, you have a little...
Yeah, let me add a little context, because I know what Brian's referring to, but I'm almost positive the board isn't. So basically,
That's right, we get it,
Yeah, so in other words, he has his capital plan, which is listed, in the capital section. And then one of the, page 66.6, one of the things in our discussion with Brian with regard to the plant and the system is that some members may recall that a number of years ago we had a study of the sewage treatment plant, and in terms of what some of the needs were. As Brian mentioned, it is 21 years old. It was probably 15 or so years at the time, and we had appropriated over a couple of years about $6,035,000. And looking at that, we were asking Brian, well, what are some of the things that he needs going forward. So he needs to do some more work on the blowers. He was mentioning the UV lights. That's the lights that he said he wasn't able to currently get. That's when the effluent passes out before it hits the harbor. The last step of the treatment. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, is it gets
Yes,
zapped
a
with the light.
disinfection equipment.
So it's a disinfection equipment. Now, as a backdrop also, at our last meeting, we were talking about, trying to reprogram various capital funds. So what I'd worked with Brian, which you presented to the Water Pollution Control Authority last week, right?
Last week, yeah.
A transfer to avoid some of these items even being requested, because these, 900,000 will be a fairly large item. That will be presented to you at your meeting on the 28th as a budget transfer. Okay. So that's
the context.
So he's hitting everything, but for your meeting tonight, it's what he
what's in
has
front
on
of us.
page
Yeah.
66.6. Yeah.
Yes. Got it. Okay, questions from Brian on the capital items or the system itself? Questions from RTM members, members of the public? All right, Brian, you're all set.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is principal debt service under the purview of Ways and Means. On page 53. Jim, you're going to take debt service together. So page 53 and 54 combined. Okay.
So I typically say this every year, but for those who aren't necessarily aware, and mostly the folks at home, the town actually borrows money for a lot of its large capital improvements. Over the years, when we did renovations to the library, the community center, and the middle school, the town of Branford borrows money for those large capital projects, and we pay those back over a series of years, and we pay principal and interest, which is what's in this budget, and we typically try to manage those costs so that in any given year they don't exceed 8% of the budget. So essentially, 8 pennies for every dollar would be used to pay off the town's mortgages, for lack of a better word, but we call it debt service. So if you think about a household, you might have a mortgage, a car payment, etc. And for the town of Branford's government, we call it debt service. You'll see that the debt service has dropped from the prior year. We've sort of hit our peak, I believe, in terms of what we were borrowing in the last couple of years. The middle school, for example, is fully financed, and that was a large project out of the way. Currently, we do have some debt that's what's called authorized, so in other words, we have the ability to borrow, which we haven't borrowed yet. One of the larger ones in that group, although it's relatively small comparatively, is the animal shelter. As you know, that project is still ongoing. We're still fundraising. And the debt service won't be calculated till we go out and issue debt, in which we won't do until all of those pieces are in. This budget does not contemplate any new borrowings that have an impact on the fiscal year. So you may recall most of our payments are made semi-annually. So what that means is that the earliest we would consider doing a bond issue would be in January of 23, and then that would then hit fiscal year 24. So 23 doesn't contemplate any new borrowings to impact this budget.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Questions on debt service? Total requested $9,348,436. Decrease is $245,000. Primarily on the interest side, I believe. No questions? Okay, questions? Tracy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jim, could you talk about the animal shelter funding and the North Branford piece with the change in the agreement?
Yep.
That North Branford's going to decide on, I guess, the contribution and how that may impact us here?
Well, let me hit a couple points. So I'll answer your last question first. Any arrangement with North Branford, whether the current arrangement or the amendment that's proposed to North Branford, won't impact this budget because that debt won't be issued until impacting a future fiscal year. So that would actually, in any case, impact a fiscal '24 year. Where we are with that, I think there was an article that I was made aware of recently in the Sound, which I think, generally speaking, faithfully represents, I think, where we're at. We did meet with the new mayor of North Branford. I say we, meaning myself, the first selectman, the town manager in North Branford, and the finance director. We kind of discussed the elements of the of what we were proposing, and also underscoring the fact that that arrangement is actually beneficial to North Branford, and it would continue to get better as the fundraising progresses. So I don't think he was necessarily aware of how that would impact. The other thing that I think folks in North Branford need to be reminded of is they currently have an agreement with the town of Branford. So there is an agreement. The agreement that we proposed is actually better for them. The other thing that was communicated to them is that they are only on the hook for the debt service as long as they continue to purchase services from us. So in other words, if they were to find another alternative for their town 3 or 4 years out, and if we issued 15-year bonds, they would not owe us for the 11 years after that, because they would then be operating on their own. That was also a point, I think, that was underscored in both appropriations when we talked about, well, what is the worst thing that could happen, and would we still go forward if that was the case? And that was when I was discussing probability versus severity, and if the severity was something that we could live with, we would move ahead with that. The other thing that I think is, the other points we made to North Branford is that, up until this point, they've had the luxury of sort of complaining about the animal shelter, but they haven't taken any votes. When they take votes, they make decisions. When they make decisions, North Branford has consequences. And so if North Branford was to say, no, we don't want to do this, then they have to have a plan B because they're required by state law to provide animal services. So that was another point that we had made to them. And the last point, I think, is probably I'll end on more of a positive note, and that is that up until this point, they have not seen the shelter. So the thinking is that once the shelter is complete, late spring, early summer, that it would probably be beneficial for folks from North Branford, council members, town leadership, etc., to see the shelter, and then they could actually see what it is that they're buying. And so that was something else that we discussed. So that's pretty much everything I can remember about our conversations and how it impacts the budget.
So that it doesn't impact this current budget?
Correct, because we haven't issued any debt for it.
Correct. Okay. Other questions with regards to this budget or particular debt service? Frank?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, in that article, which I also read, I mean, it seemed to me that, like, the big objection they had, they said, well, I mean, if the town of North Branford pays for the animal shelter, a portion of the animal shelter, at the time that it's completed, that's paid for, the people in our town, when that happens, they aren't going to own any portion of it. Right, they have to pay the capital, they have to pay the expenses. So, could that be talked about with them at all, do you think? Would that help?
I don't know that there's a way to assuage that concern of theirs, and actually, philosophically, I oppose it, because one is that it's a very common arrangement. So, for example, if I'm renting an apartment from someone, I think it's common understanding that my rent actually pays my landlord's mortgage. I believe when North Branford, who contracts out garbage services, when that hauler has to buy new packers for his fleet, I assume that cost gets passed on to North Branford. It is true that there is some concerns about a large investment on their behalf for something they don't own, but that is not unique to prior arrangements with North Branford. We just heard a presentation from the treatment plant. The debt service for the treatment plant and sewer items are also shared by North Branford, and they're not owners of the treatment plant. I don't think the town of Branford's going to sell them any shares in the animal shelter, so I guess the town could do that in theory, but I don't think that's a path we're going to pursue. So that goes back to my original statement that I think the article faithfully captured what some of the issues are, and I think that we just have to get them through that. But again, I think it's very compelling to say that what is proposed to them is actually better than what they have, and so I think they have to figure out how they digest that. And as I said earlier, they have to, at some point, they're going to have to take action, and actions have consequences, and then they're going to have to weigh whether pulling out is beneficial to them or not.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, other questions with regards to debt service? Okay, thank you, Jim. Next, we'll move on to contingency, page 59. Total request of $1,055,824. Increase of $338,000. Jim?
Yep. Okay, so the common question is, well, what's in contingency? And contingency, it really hits a couple different categories. One is there's contingency for unsettled contracts typically, and then there's what I would call like a regular contingency for things that you would need dollars for that you never had actually anticipated. Jamie alluded to the fact that the legal budget is flat, so we typically, and the fact that it's event-driven, so there's usually an element of contingency there. Storms, and also primaries, and then this year too is, maybe it's reflective of my somewhat conservative nature, is I think you also need to somehow at least make some account for fuel costs. So when you kind of look at all those together, that's basically what we're looking at.
Thanks, Jim. And what do we start off with for the current fiscal year?
I have a sheet somewhere. Okay, here it is. So we started this fiscal year with 824,261, and we are down to 505,260.
Okay. So the 716 is the adjusted amount downward from the original budget that we passed, just for reference.
Okay.
Okay. Questions on contingency from the board? Questions from RTM members, general public? Okay, thank you. Jim, so for tonight, we will, I'll entertain a motion to a recess for the evening, and we'll pick the public hearings up again tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Motion's been made to recess, seconded by Jeff. Discussion, all in favor? Aye. Thank you.
This program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.